Hello, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I know people are joining us from different places. Welcome to our second webinar. And today's topic, as was already announced, is on scholarly writing and publishing. And before I delve into it, please bear in mind that there is an extensive article on the website itself, which you can even download. And if you're interested in a digital copy, you can purchase a digital copy on Amazon or also a print copy. But all of these materials are also available in written form, and I had encouraged you to read before today's talk. So the format is going to be the same as of the last webinar, and I do apologize for the limitations of this medium because I can't see you or interact with you. So I am most of the times looking at the camera and speaking to a computer screen, but I do hope that everything is coming clearly to you. If you look down on the page towards your right, there is a chat box. You can very easily introduce yourself, put your name in there, and post any questions that you might have so that I can incorporate those questions in my talk today. So as I said, today we'll be talking about scholarly writing, mostly in humanities, but also in social sciences. And I always ask my students, to think about publishing itself before they even start writing or start attempting to publish. Because to answer the question as to why we publish or why we want to publish is crucial to the path that you will take. And I have figured out over a lifetime, and as an active scholar, there are always various reasons that motivate us to write and publish our writings. And for example, the biggest reason that most humanists will give you is that we write to produce knowledge, which is a fact. Yeah, every time we write something and publishes, we are adding to a body of knowledge in our field of study. But it can also be a trap because it's also a strategy to depoliticize our work, because we can, in that famous Arnoldian sense, the scholarship of detachment, we can just convince ourselves that our job is to produce knowledge, to keep writing over the long term and not worry about what's happening in the world right now. So the scholarship thus is not contingent upon what's happening in the world, or doesn't try to ameliorate or change anything. It just is. It just says, here I am, read me, and maybe in 100 years the world would change. So if you have that perception of scholarship, I'm not saying it's good or bad, then the kind of scholarship that you will produce will be different, because it's driven by a different idea of what scholarly writing is. Another way of looking at it, as people convince themselves that, okay, I want to publish to contribute to my field of study, which is absolutely what we are required to do, because we all have our disciplines, our fields, our subfields, and professionally, the fields are there so that we can have, a body of knowledge that we can grasp instead of trying to learn everything. And if you assume that you write to produce knowledge and publish within your field of study, then that can be a very powerful thing, but it can also be very limiting, because if that's the only focus you have, then any idea or any thought that occurs to you or that you want to write about, but if it's not pertinent to your field of study, you will probably not pursue it. And sometimes things you publish that have no direct connection with your field of study can be wonderful projects. I mean, my last book, it's published under sociology by Routledge. It's on ISIS. It hardly uses any literary text. It does use text. But if I had limited myself to what constitutes an idealized form of post-colonial studies and literary studies, I probably would have not written the book. But I took a risk or decided to go beyond my field. But either way, this is one of the reasons we give ourselves that I want to write and publish to contribute to my field of study. There is another trap in this field of study mode of thinking, which is called Discourse of the Discipline by Mark Brocker, a wonderful scholar on critical and radical pedagogy, and also my colleague and former colleague and friend, because what that drives us to do then is to just master the field, and the height of accomplishment then is to produce knowledge and published work in it. And it still doesn't encourage us to look beyond the field of study, look at the world outside and how does our work impact it, or can our work impact it? And then is the most political mode of thinking about scholarly writing, which is that to impact the world. I mean, that's what most of us who are invested in social change, in global justice, in equity, we mostly think about these issues. How is this article going to have some kind of an impact in the world? Of course, I mean, as humanists or as professors, we already know that we don't have enough power to transform the world, but we have the power to write. And if that drives your ambition to publish, then your writing would automatically place itself within that mission, in the mission of addressing some issues of social justice, some issues of equity, some issues that impact people's lives. And maybe we do not dare to speak for the people, right? But maybe we can speak in solidarity with them, especially from our privileged location in the academy. And then, I mean, there is the most cynical reason is for professional recognition, which is not necessarily cynical because it has its advantages. So if you want to publish a body of work so that you're recognized within your profession as a scholar in your field of study, there are, of course, material advantages of it. But I see it from the point of view of my students. If I'm well known in my field of study, that means more people would respond to my request, would positively view the work of my students. And so if I continuously publish and am an active scholar, I can help my graduate students better in their placement, in placement of their work. So in a way, if you're an active scholar, and if you have some kind of professional recognition for your work, you can enable more scholars and more students to do good work. And that's a good reason, in my opinion, that might motivate us to publish. And then to me, and I found this out during my public lectures in Pakistan, is to produce a body of work as a reference. And what do I mean by that? That is, when I give public talks in Pakistan, and me, a leftist, socialist, liberal professor, and usually my talks are very well received. People in Pakistan are kind and generous and always ask the most pertinent questions. But sometimes, people do question your validity as an expat scholar. Someone could stand up in an audience and say, what do you know of our problems? You live in America. We have often heard you praise America and so many of American values. So then your work becomes your own reference, because you can point to your published work and say, no, I am not an apologist for American foreign policy. I actually have published work that criticizes American foreign policy. Similarly, on any other contentious issues that people might want to pigeonhole you, maybe to undermine you, or maybe to prove that maybe you're not necessarily an unmotivated scholar. So that to me is also very crucial over a lifetime, over your career, to produce a body of work that is recognized and that speaks for you even when you're not there, in that Derridian fashion, like your absence kind of becomes the presence. So these are some of the reasons I think we should keep in mind and ask ourselves, reflect upon them. Why do I want to publish? Because they will then decide in a way, maybe sometimes imperceptibly, the direction of your research or the topics that you choose. So let me reiterate, we publish to produce knowledge, right? To contribute to our field of study, to impact the world. For me, that's the most important. To meet professional requirements for professional recognition, and to create a body of work. So to meet professional requirements, I think I missed that one, is wherever you're working as a professor or a lecturer, there are certain publication expectations. So many times we are publishing maybe simply because we need to publish. That to me is kind of the most cynical, view of publications, but it's also practical because, we all live in this world and we have to make a living. And if we have to publish, if that motivates you, maybe for you it would work better. But do keep in mind that there are certain things that should not be decided by simply this factor. For example, let me give you an example. The Higher Education Commission in Pakistan stipulates where to publish. It tells the scholars, okay, these are the journals on our list. If you publish in these journals, we will give you credit for it towards your promotion or towards your salary raise or whatever. And so scholars then go and look for these impact factor journals and publish in them. But in the process, most people forget that even if your publication doesn't count towards Higher Education Commission's mandate, it can enhance your career. It can broaden your reach. And I'll give you an example of my own journal, Pakistaniyat, the Journal of Pakistan Studies, which I believe is one of the finest journals on Pakistan. Until 2012, we were recognized by Higher Education Commission, and we were getting a lot of submissions from Pakistan. Since then, since they changed their policy, we are no longer listed. So the number of submissions to our journals from Pakistan have drastically been reduced. But if you publish with us, you will still get the same editorial help. You'll still get the same editorial guidance. And then your articles will still be published in an international open access journal. That means that your article would be accessible to anyone who has an internet connection. And hence, maybe that publication, which may not count for your professional, requirements, could introduce you to a broader audience and place your work in maybe a different journal, a journal accepted by Higher Education Commission. So even when you publish for professional requirements, you should keep these things in mind. Now I can see some people have joined us. I'm just going to look up at the chat box. So we have Gulzar from Peshawar. Maria has joined us from Dubai. Thank you so much for joining us. And those of you who are still joining us, please feel free to introduce yourself through the chat box and post your questions too. So as I say in my write-up, I'm not going to talk about the mechanics, grammar, and style of writing a paper. I'm assuming you already know that, or that you have taken a course, or you can figure that one out. I'm just talking about the strategic aspects of publishing. So the most important thing with which I ask my students is, how do you come up with a topic? We all just assume that people will have nice paper topics, but how do we come up with a topic? How do we know that what I am about to write about, maybe 25 to 30 pages, is worthy of that much of effort, has not been done, or if it has been done, I can contribute differently to it? And that's where the preliminary research comes in. So the first part of our research is to figure out, okay, I have this idea about this novel, right, called Raja Gil by Bano Qudsiya, right? Since it's in Urdu, I can assume in the United States of America that not much has been written about it. But any other novel or a short story, if I'm going to write about it, I have to first go find out what have others said about it. And the reason I must find that out is simple, because any scholarly work, by and large, is a conversation within the field with other scholars. So we want to know first, who has said what about it, who has written what about it. That's becoming part of the conversation. And the only way we can know the conversation is if we do our basic research. And how do we do that? Okay, so in United States, I work at a research university, so that's kind of a privileged location. So I encourage my students to go to the university website, click on the databases. For English studies, the ideal database is the Modern Languages Association's directory of periodicals, and just their general directory on articles. So what you do is you basically just put your primary search terms in their database, and you see what comes up. MLA would list for you different articles, sometimes 50, sometimes 30, sometimes only 3 or 4. So that has now given you a range of collated articles roughly related to your keywords or your topic. You don't need to read all of those articles. That's why most journals ask you to give them an abstract. Why is the abstract mandatory? Because abstract is necessary for journals to create their metadata, to create the data that comes up when someone does a search for a journal or an article. So I would say look through those articles that come up and see which is pertinent to you, closely related to what you're trying to write about. And read the abstracts. Now, after you read the abstracts, it's like maybe 30 pages of reading. You'll find out, okay, 5 or 6 of these articles closely are either talking about what you want to write about or inform you about what you want to write about. Then read those 5-6 articles. Okay. Now, also look at it in terms of a temporality. It can't be like just a 1965 article. See what has been written lately about it, because most reviewers would look for that. And I'll get to that later. So that's the first stage. Now you've read about 5-6 articles about your topic. You know what has been said about it, and that gives you the place to enter the conversation, right? Because you can now find out, okay, this aspect of this novel, no one is talking about this. Or if someone is talking about it, I could say that thing differently if I look at it from a different angle, right? So that would roughly give you an idea of what your topic could be, and how to come up with it, knowing where the conversation is. Now, I know that those of you joining us from Pakistan will tell me we don't have these things available. No, you do, okay? Higher Education Commission has the MLA directory. They have EBSCO, right? They have all the other resources. If you go to their digital library portal, you can connect to those through your university library. If your institution doesn't provide it, ask them, can you give us links to what Higher Education Commission has purchased for Pakistan? And let me tell you also that the nations like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh are at an advantage when they come and deal with these database companies. There are 6 or 7 companies in the world that own the entire knowledge, okay? Like Taylor and Francis, Springer Group, elsewhere if you're in the sciences. And so what they do is they package these into databases and sell it to the university libraries. So my library, UNT, pays about $1.2 million a year for one science database. Now we have to have it to keep our accreditation, right? And every year these companies do an escalation, 8%. There is no negotiation with them because we as a university are too small an entity to negotiate with them. But developing nations they can go and negotiate as a nation. Higher Education Commission, when they go to elsewhere, they don't go as a single university. They say, we represent Pakistan. Now, what rates will you give us? So chances are they're getting these databases on a much better price, and they're making them available. So please use it to narrow down your topic. After you've done that, and I'm seeing if there are any questions. Oh, we have someone from California too. Welcome. Okay, you're also on a different time zone. So, okay, so you have figured out that what you want to write about, there is a space in existing scholarship where you can enter the conversation. Okay, or if you're lucky enough, you find out nothing has been written about this topic. So then you're in the realm of the original, right? Then you come to, the post-research, preliminary research phase. Okay, now is the time to define the thesis of your article. I'm basically speaking about article because books are more expensive, or a controlling idea. But as someone who is reviewed for PMLA and other journals, okay, pretty much 90% of humanities and social sciences journals, the reviewers want to see your thesis on the first page, right? You cannot just go on and on the first 3 pages and give us an implied thesis on the 3rd page. No, the paper must state, right, in the very first instance, like 2nd paragraph, what is it proposing to explain? Okay, and I have certain examples in the write-up, which I hope you've downloaded, but I use one of my own article about Osman Sembin's, so like novel, right? So crafting a thesis is important. Okay, and what will decide that for you is the kind of paper you want to write. Okay, so if it's just an expository paper, a paper that introduces something, which you won't be writing at that level. At your level, you will be writing the most sophisticated paper, and which is an argumentative paper, which has to have a different thesis. But if it's a simple, expository paper, you can start with, in this paper, I intend to introduce the concept of love in Rumi's Masnavi, right? And so the idea is you're just going to explain how Rumi invokes the concept of love, ishq, or muhabba, and then explain it through a reading of the Masnavi. I don't recommend it. It's a 700-page Masnavi, so you'll be spending a lifetime trying to figure that out, but that's an idea. But most theses for a scholarly paper are slightly more complex than that. Because what you're trying to say is, if you're using theory, what you're trying to convey is that I will read Osman Sembin's novel, God's Bits of Wood, using this particular perspective. So let us say, in my paper, I try to introduce the novel in the very first sentence, right? I assume that you always assume that the reader has read the novel. So you don't summarize the novel that much. So I usually start with a sentence like, published in 19 so-and-so, Osman Sembin's novel, God's Bits of Words, stages the ideal conditions for solidarity and a revolutionary movement. Okay, so now in one sentence, I've introduced the novel, and I've also said, in my view, this is what it does. And then in the next phase, you introduce your theoretical concept. So I was using Frederick Jameson's concept of the ideology, which is in his Political Unconscious. Right? So I said, using Jameson's concept of the ideology, I would like to suggest that this novel, if read carefully, can be a great didactic tool for teaching solidarity in the era of neoliberal capital. So that kind of becomes my precise thesis. What I'm arguing is that I'm going to read this novel. I'm going to read it using this concept. And I'm going to read it to prove this point. Okay, that's a thesis. You also, in explaining your thesis, give a justification. You must also tell your audience, why is it necessary, right? What will your paper do? So for me, as a political scholar, I always put in, what will it do in the world? Okay, if I can read a novel more acutely, how does it enhance my teaching or my understanding of the world? Or how does it impact the world? So you don't need to do that, but that's one way of doing it. So your thesis then, before your thesis, you have a brief introduction. You just briefly introduce the text. Then you introduce what is it that you are going to do, why, and which theoretical tool will you use. Theory is not there for you and me to come across as really smart and intelligent. Theory is not about using heavy words and assuming that the audience knows it. The next step is, you tell your readers, before I delve into the discussion of the novel, I would like to explain the concept of the ideology. Right? There are two reasons for that. One, so that your paper is didactic in itself, so that the reader, while reading your theoretical stance, also understands, okay, this is what the ideology means. But two, you're also making sure that anyone who's critical of your use of that particular concept knows how precisely are you understanding it and applying it. If there are any counter arguments to the theoretical argument that you're using or the concept which have been published, you can add a footnote within which you can say, I am aware of so-and-so's critique of this concept, but I feel here I can use it as Jameson intended it. So what you've done there is you've forestalled a point by a reviewer who would otherwise say, this paper doesn't take into account so-and-so's critique of the concept, right? So you have already covered what I say your flanks, right? Because one mistake that you cannot make in writing a paper is to come across as someone who is not aware of the whole debate around a concept, about a theoretical concept. So that's what footnotes are for. You can explain it in the body of the paper as well, but I would say footnote it. Also, if you're using any large generalizations, the American people, the Islamic world, right? Muslims, add a footnote there and tell your reader, I'm aware that I'm mobilizing a huge generalization here, okay? But here, in that Derridian fashion, I'm using it under erasure because there is no other term that would do what I'm doing. So explain why you're using a huge generalization. I mean, I would say avoid using them, but that's what footnotes are for. So the thesis would then drive your discussion. Everything in your paper that you put in there, you have to ask yourself this one question when you're reading it. Okay, I put in this paragraph here. How does this bear upon my thesis? Does it augment it? Does it explain it further? Occasionally in the body of your paper, remind your reader what your project is. This is what I promised in the beginning of this paper. Okay. Now, I am insisting here that you should use the first person. Okay. I encourage my students to use the first person because I'm very suspicious of that feigned objectivism, right? Where people use, and the researcher did this, right? Or this paper does that. We all know that your subjectivity is behind that paper. Whosoever you are, your politics is behind it, right? So there is no harm in putting the I in there, Okay, it also enables you to write more clearly. But depending on where you are submitting it, if a journal doesn't like the first person, then you can revise it accordingly. Okay. So someone just messaged that their messages are not showing on the screen, but they are. I mean, I'm seeing it, and I don't know, Sabia. Yeah, your messages are showing on the screen. Just look towards the left of the chat box. Okay. Unless you are on a phone, then I don't know how to help you. Okay. So far, here is what we've discussed, right? Your reasons for publication, right? Why do you want to publish? Because that is going to drive the kind of works you produce, where you publish, and how you think of publishing. Right? And then, how do you find out about your topic? Now, this applies not only to an article, it also applies to your dissertation, okay, or your MPhil thesis. Because how do you know that what you're writing about, all 300 pages of it, is actually original? You don't want to write the whole thing and then find out it was sent to a reviewer who basically said, well, there is nothing original here. So and so have already published a book on it. So you do your research to find out that the topic that you have this rough idea about is worthy of your effort, right? That there is room in already published scholarship for your argument to enter the conversation. And that you only know if you do your research, find out what is published about that particular novel or that particular topic, and then craft your thesis. The thesis, as I already suggested, needs to explain what is it that you're doing, right? Which theoretical tool will you use, and why? Why are you doing what you're doing? I mean, if you're going to explain the instances of female agency in a novel, right? That's just the beginning point. Why is it necessary to point that out? Would it enhance the level of understanding of your students? Would it create a space within the public sphere so that women become more aware of their political situation? Because simply saying, I will do this, is first part of your thesis, but you have to justify your thesis as well, right? So that's the second part of your thesis. Now, moving beyond that is the question of interweaving your theory with your discussion of the novel, right? So let's say I am using, for example, I just wrote something about Aravind Adiga's The White Tiger. Okay, there are different ways of looking at that novel. You can just look at that novel as a novel set in contemporary India and read it as a critique of the powerful Indian elite, right? Now, if I want to read it theoretically, then I decided, okay, I'm going to do a Marxist reading of it. But, Marx produced thousands of words, hundreds of thousands. So what do I mean by I'm going to do a Marxist critique of it? So it has to be precise. So I went towards, Capital Volume 1. There's an appendix at the end of it where Marx explains the concepts of formal and real subsumption of labor. Now, those were my concepts. So I read up on those. So according to Marx, then, labor is subsumed into capital in two stages, right? First is the formal subsumption of labor. And that happens when capital rises, the mode of production, especially in the rural parts of England and other places, is still based in a feudal economy, right? So what capital does is it works with that model as it exists, right? It subsumes labor into its project, but the labor is still caught into the older system of hierarchies, right? So that is formal subsumption of labor. Formalistically, labor has been subsumed in the capitalistic project, but its life is still caught in that feudal order. And then under real subsumption of labor is when labor becomes part of the commodity manufacturing and is dependent on that job and is no longer caught into, the feudal system of economy. So my argument there was that we can read The White Tiger as a narrative which tells us the story of neoliberal capital, but what happens to workers who are living in the most brutal form of capitalism, but who are still caught in that formal stage of subsumption of labor. Because our protagonist, why is he called the white tiger? White tigers are rare. He's one of the very few workers who makes it, right? Becomes rich. But how does he knows the cost of doing that, right? The moment he makes the decision to kill his master, take the money and start his business, he knows that his family, which lives in the village, right, under a feudal system, will be totally obliterated. So the only choice that he has in that capitalistic society is to acknowledge that for him to succeed, he has to accept this fact that his entire family will die. Now that happens only because part of his family is caught in a capitalistic system which still is governed through a feudal system of production, right? So they have not been completely subsumed, right? There is no real. So that is the tool that I decided I was going to use to read The White Tiger. So what you do then in the body of your paper is discuss also your understanding of the theoretical tool itself. You discuss, this is how I understand Marx's, concept of real subsumption of labor, and this is how it's pertinent to this novel. Now, why? Okay, so then you have to answer the question, okay, I use this theoretical tool to read this novel, but can I just leave it there? I think the idea is to explain, why is it necessary? What would it add to the general conversation? So, as I said, as a leftist, socialist, liberal scholar, I always connect my work to, if we read it carefully like this, using these tools. If I'm going to talk about pedagogy, I can suggest that me teaching this novel in an American classroom will then enable me to teach empathy to my students, or to teach them about the unjust aspects of the capital in which they live, right? You can connect it to anything within your own local requirements. It may not be necessary for the journal in which you're publishing to do that, but depending on what your politics is as a scholar, I think explaining that is crucial, right? So you come up with a thesis, you have a theoretical way of looking at that text. And then you also explain, why are you explaining it the way you are explaining it, right? Well, what is the end result? What will it do in the world? So I strongly urge you also, I'm speaking in air here, is to download my article on Osman Sembin. It's available on the website under my publications. You can just download the PDF and you'll understand what I'm trying to say. So let me see, I have a question here, which I answered because my opinion, they are represented. Okay, so that's a good question. Because someone, I think Aisha has asked that one of the reviewers had asked why had she chosen some poems to analyze. And her answer was because they represent the environmental issues faced by humans. And then here, the reviewer's answer was, well, what if the poems themselves are doing that, why do we need you to explain that? And that is a pertinent question. If the poem speaks for itself, save the roses and the trees, why do they need me and you? And that is where this issue comes on, right? Not to explain that is self, but to say, I'm not explaining the poem to you. I'm using the poem as a tool. Okay, So you can either look at it from a pedagogical perspective. As a teacher, I would like to use these 3 poems about nature to teach what? That the poems are about nature? Of course not. That's already in the poems. The poems have said it. But that if we read these poems carefully, we can learn to appreciate nature more. Or maybe we can mobilize for a cause to save nature, right? Because the poems encourage us to think about it or to act about it. So a mere act of reading something as what it is or what it presents itself is not going to cut it for so many people. Now, there is also another thing that you can do. I mean, if you are into deconstruction, you can look at a work and say, here is what this work offers itself to be. But I will do a deep reading of the text itself to suggest that actually it's not doing what it proposes to do. It actually reinforces the very thing that it's attempting to challenge. That's what we call deconstruction, right? You find that moment, that place in a text where it overflows its own logic, and then you unravel that. That's a different kind of criticism. But what I have observed in my reviewing of dissertations, and it's so sad for so many people. I once read a dissertation, I'm not going to name peoples or institutions, about an author in which all the argument was that so-and-so's Holocaust experience made his work fairly unique and had an impact on his life, his work. In the process of writing the dissertation, the person writing the dissertation is citing 2 biographies of the author which make the same claim, and he copiously cites from it. Now, my question as a reviewer was, okay, if these 2 books have already done that, proven that the Holocaust experience had a huge impact on this author's way of looking at the world, why do we need your dissertation to prove that again, right? Because what that person failed to do in that dissertation was tell us what new way of looking at the text produced by the author and the secondary text about, was there something new that he or she was adding, right? Or was he taking the research into a different direction? So I was in this hard place where and someone has written 300 pages, and a supervisor has approved it, and you are the reviewer, what do you do, right? You can't just waste someone's 2 years of work. So basically all I said there was that it was the supervisor's fault, right? He or she should have caught that aspect of the dissertation in the very beginning and asked the question, okay, you're citing these 2 books. They're saying exactly the same things. Your dissertation is saying the same thing. So what is new that you're trying to add to that conversation? So then this question of newness, does it have to be absolutely original and new? No, but just a new way of looking at the same text. And there is no harm in acknowledging what others have produced before you. All you're saying is so-and-so, and that's where what you call literature review, what we call accounting for what has come before you, is built into the body of your essay. So at some point in your essay, after you've explained your thesis, laid down your theory and explained why you are using that particular theory, you can add a couple of paragraphs which suggest, okay, before I go into discussing what I've proposed, I would like to take a look at what others have said about it. And so you give us brief citations of what others have said about it. These are the articles that you've already read. Now, in doing so, you can cite their main ideas about the text. But I would say if you disagree with them, right, be kind. Give them credit for doing something that has enabled you to use their work, and then you can go in and say, now, if they had looked at it from this point of view, maybe their findings would have been different. That is why I am picking up where they left the conversation, and this is where I am moving it. So you acknowledge their work, you kindly, gently point to their limitations, and then explain your reason for writing the paper because it's trying to fill those gaps. Now, that's what scholarship is, a conversation. I would say don't be outrightly mean to anyone who has published before you. Partly it's unprofessional, and two, some of these people would eventually become your friends. Okay, I remember I took out an entire section of an article which criticized a scholar's work because that scholar eventually became my friend. And I was like, okay, I can write this paper without taking this person to task. I privately told that person, this is what I think of your book, and they agreed with me that they were too young when they wrote it. But these are some of the decisions you make because you're also working within a profession and you want to be generous and kind to people. Okay. Now, I don't know if there are any questions about this phase of the writing process. Let me check. Okay. If someone said like you're waiting for the webinar to start, yeah, please refresh your page. Okay, cool. So I guess it is working. There is a little bit of delay between when I speak and when it gets to you. So if there are no questions, I will go to the next phase, and that is, writing the first draft. How do you write? Now that will depend on your own, sorry, I'm smoking, your own style of writing. Okay, so some people pour over every single sentence, every single paragraph, get it perfect, and then move to the next paragraph. And some people are crazy like me. Like people like me sit down, we read, take notes, and then when you're ready to write an article, you sit down and try to get down your first draft in one sitting. Okay, 5-6 hours, you have about 25 pages, you write it down. You don't edit yourself while writing. I can give you like a funny example is anytime I'm working on a book project, I don't correct my grammar or anything as I'm writing. And so there always comes a point in the process of writing a book that a message pops up on my screen, which says, Microsoft Word has stopped checking this document for spelling errors as there are too many mistakes in this document. So I literally break Microsoft Word. So what is the advantage of that? The advantage of that is that you're not worried about fixing grammar or spellings. You just want to get your ideas down. Right? And if you can write a first draft, no matter how imperfect it is, which has the gist of your ideas down, then with modern technologies of editing, you can spend more time on making it perfect, on fixing it. The more important thing is getting your ideas down, right? Because that, if you pause and ponder, you are not going to be more effective as a writer. That's my strategy. It works for me. See and try it. But write the first draft, I would suggest, as freely as possible without worrying about formatting. If you're going to cite someone, right, just tell yourself, cite Foucault here. You know which citation, unless there is a discussion of that quote. Then you pause and you put that quote there and then discuss it in your writing. But other than that, if it's just a reference to someone else, as so-and-so says, give yourself a hint, move on. Give us the discussion of what you think of what so-and-so says, right? So when you get the first draft down, then you have 10, 15, 20 pages of an argument of your paper. Then comes the hard part, right? Then is the first thing to do always is get the spell check out of the way, right? Figure it out. Then go sentence by sentence and edit and correct. And after you've done that, then go and read it again and see where else do you need to add more information more of a discussion, right? And when you have a respectable first draft, then share it with your friends. If you're part of a writing group, ask your colleagues, hey, would you read my draft and give me some suggestions? Ask your professors. It depends on how generous they are with their time. But if your professors are active scholars and you're working with them, you can ask them, Dr. Raja, I'm writing this article. Would it be okay if I send it to you? Give them enough time. The idea is you have a first draft. Now you can ask for people's help. You can ask for people's opinions. Some people are good editors. They will tell you, here, change this language, take these bunch of henses out. Right? I put a lot of henses in my writing. Or some people would give you strategic advice. Okay, you read this person and your argument will be better because in such and such book, Eagleton says this, you're saying the same thing, see if you can use that. So depending on what their expertise is and what their way of looking at a draft is, they will give you their opinions. You take those opinions. It's not mandatory for you to implement them, but it's a good idea if you incorporate those suggestions, revise it, and then go to the final kind of editing of it where you think that the coherence is great and that there are no surface errors in the paper. You cannot have a paper. You cannot have a paper with like minor errors in it that you send for publication. So now, if you have a revised paper ready with input from the others, with the help of the others, is the time to, you probably already have some journals in mind. Right? Now is the time to go and read, their author guidelines. A lot of journals would actually tell you which citation format that they use, unless you've already written the article with a journal in mind. So if you're going to submit it to a journal, first go and read a few things that they publish so that you have an idea what is it that they generally publish about, right? Does your paper fit that profile of what they published before, that style? Then look at their author guidelines. The author guidelines will tell you we require all papers to be using the MLA format. So make sure that your article is in the MLA, uses the MLA style of citations. Most journals would do blind peer review. So that means that your name cannot be on the paper. Okay, so take your name out, even if you have referred to your own work, right? Do it in the third person, right? Take your name out of there. There should be nothing in the paper that can identify you. Because sometimes, the editors would send your paper back simply because they say, well, you haven't followed our author guidelines. Look at whether they want it in double space or single space. Do they want a cover sheet on it, right? All of these things are important because they make the editor's job easier. The editor is not worried about technicalities. They have a paper which follows the guidelines, and then they can send it out to review. Now, there are two processes that most journals use. Okay, most journals will receive a paper and they will send it straight to two reviewers at least. Some journals have a layered decision-making process. So the first stage is that the editorial board or the editorial team members look at the papers and decide, okay, is it good enough to send to reviewers? Or we can just say, no, thank you, it doesn't suit our requirements. So then they will just, if they think, okay, this doesn't fit what we need for our journal, they will just let you know, sorry, we are not going to send it to review. In some cases, that editors will decide, okay, this is a good enough article, let's send it out to review. And so they send it out to two reviewers for double-blind review. The double-blind review basically means that the the reviewers don't know who has written the article, and you don't know who has reviewed it. So if a journal tells you we have sent your article for review, you have already crossed the first hurdle, right? Give a journal about 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, most journals would tell you on their website, this is how long it takes for us to get the articles reviewed. Okay. So after 8 weeks, if you haven't heard back from them, send them a polite note. I mean, as an editor of a journal, I've realized that the moment I get an email from someone, Dr. Raja, what about my article? I immediately start looking for, okay, what stage is it? Where is it? It doesn't mean that I'm going to accept and publish but at least it reminds me, oh, this paper is, out for review. Let's send a reminder to the reviews. Right? So it's good. Send a polite email. Always just send dear so and so, dear editor. If you can find their name, good. Introduce yourself. I am so and so. I had sent this article on such and such date. I was just wondering if you have reached any decision, or if you have received or when can I expect the reviewer reports to come back. It's always nice to be professional and polite, right? Because most editors and editorial boards, they're not getting paid for their work. They do it as a service to the profession itself, and they have full-time jobs other than just editing the journal. So, be nice and kind, and they will respond to you in most of the cases. Now let's see your reviews have come back. Okay, you got 2 reviews. And so first of all, it is important to understand the reviewer's appraisal of you. So one is just says the reviewers have rejected your paper. Here is the report. Just take the report and see if it applies to your paper, and revise it and submit it elsewhere. There can be another category where it is revised, major revisions required. So the editor sends you back the paper and says, the reviewers have requested that you make certain major revisions. Here are the review reports. Now, if the editor says, please revise and resubmit, now that is, you're halfway through, because the editor is interested enough in your paper that even though both the reviewers said this paper requires some major revisions and here is how the author can revise it, the editor is still willing to put in his or her time and asking you to revise and resubmit. So a revise and resubmit is never really a rejection. So I would say, take the suggestions, revise your paper, and resubmit. Then there could be a reviewer report which says, revise with minor corrections. You are now at the top, right? That means all you have to do is incorporate the changes that the reviewers have suggested and send back the article to the editor. The editor will not start a new batch of reviews. They will just take that and move it into the publication queue. Also, like if the editor says, here are your 2 reviews, please revise and send it back to me, it is always good, even when they don't ask for it, to add kind of a revision log, right? So what I do is I sometimes say, okay, here is how I've revised the article. Reviewer 1, reviewer 2, here is what reviewer 1 had suggested. I have changed this to this, I've changed this to this, I've changed this to this, so that the editor can sit with your log and say, okay, these were the changes required. Here is how this person have made the changes. Now, if there is a change that is asked for which you disagree with, you can point out that I understand that the reviewer read this way, but this is crucial to my argument, so I have decided not to revise this. Okay, so in the end, if you send them a log along with your changes, chances are the editor would be happier with you and would like to publish your paper. There's another aspect of it. Sometimes when I've written deeply political, especially books, I have asked the editors, I always request them, look, it would require a certain generous kind of reviewer to read this book differently. So please do not send it to these kind of reviewers. And they always understand. If I'm writing a book on Talibanization of America, I don't want them to send it to someone who's totally hostile to my idea itself, because then the review is not going to be about the substance of my book. It is going to be what the ideological positioning of the reviewer is. So sometimes if you get a review which you feel like is ideologically motivated, you can point that out to the editor and say, look, I understand these points, but these are points from a political point of view. They've got nothing to do with the substance of my paper. And I think that will also, encourage the editor to take a second look on it. So now let's say you've revised, you've resubmitted or sent your article back. The editor gets back to you and says, all right, we are accepting your article and we'll publish it in the fall issue of our journal or some other issue of our journal. Okay, I'm going to pause here. Should we ever pay to the journal to publish? No. Okay, in humanities, if a journal says, pay us $250 publication fee and we will publish your essay, it probably is a scam. So never pay. No worthwhile humanities journal will charge you a review fee or an editing fee or a publishing fee. Most of those things are scams. Okay, so please don't pay for your publications. Look up. Even if a journal, and this is slightly off the, if you get this email, we would love to publish your articles. Most of the times these journals call themselves American Journal of Linguistic Studies. Look them up. Okay, you can always find out whether a journal is fake or predatory by looking them up, because you'll find some list on the web by a library or someone which will point to these are fake journals. And there are consequences of publishing in those journals, okay? Because it gets attached to your name. 10 years from now, people will say, oh, well, that person published in a fake journal. Okay, even if you become a great scholar, your name will be attached to that. So no, please do not pay for publication. Okay. Now in sciences, even the big journals, Nature and others, are subvention-based journals. Okay. What happens is the scientific journals already know that most of the scientific research is done through grant funding. And every scientist who writes a grant also puts in there the subvention fee, $5,000, $7,000, which they know they will have to pay to the journal towards the end, not in the beginning. After the paper has been accepted, the journal would say, we charge $4,000 subvention fee, and they pay it because it's written in the grant. Now, there is another way where it's okay to pay, is like Taylor and Francis and other journals say, okay, for $3,000, we can make your article open access. That's a different kind of payment, because they are saying, okay, we'll give you the option of having this in a controlled journal, or if you pay us $3,000, we can make it open access. Anyone can read it. That's a different kind of payment. But if a journal tells you, we charge a $50 reading fee, or we charge a $200 publication fee, they're already predatory. If you're in Pakistan, I can tell you 150 of these journals are launched by two people from Gujranwala and Faisalabad. Okay, just look at the language of how they describe themselves as journals. Their editorial boards are usually fake. Okay. So where was I? Okay. What should an author do if one reviewer accepts the article with changes while the other outrightly rejects the article? Now that would be the editor's decision. Okay. The editor can say, we are sorry, we would not like to publish your article. Or the editor would say, okay, this other reviewer has liked it, In most cases, the editor should send it to a third reviewer. Now, if you get two reviews, one for, one strongly against, and the editor says, sorry, we can't publish it, you can always request and say, could you please send it to a third reviewer? Okay. Because, I mean, it's a 50-50 chance. So why is the editor deciding to not accept the article, right? Or you can say, you can write a response to the negative review. Either way, it's okay to write to the editor and say, I understand you have two different reviewers, but here is my response to the negative review. Don't use the term negative review, to reviewer B. Or ask them politely, would it be okay to send it to a third reviewer? I have done it so many times for my own journal. Okay. So that answers that. So moving on to, okay, so after your article has been accepted, you've revised it, you've sent it in, you got the intimation from the editor that it will be published. Now is the most crucial phase, because any good journal will now send your article to their copy editors, right? Now, we are a volunteer-based journal, Pakistaniyat. We never publish an article without thorough copy editing. Those of you who published with us already know it. Now, what does a copy editor do? A copy editor will not give you conceptual suggestions about change. They are line editors. Their job is to read the article line by line and give you suggestions about where do you need a comma, where do you need an and, what to omit, what to delete, what prepositions to add. And most journals do that using Microsoft Word, the track changes feature. So chances are, and they will do formatting for you and also check your citation system, is it consistent? After a copy editor has gone through your article, and when it comes back to you and you look at it, it looks like a daunting document because there are so many marks on it. I mean, don't be discouraged, right? If a journal has done that for your article, they have done you a service because they've tried to improve your article. Now it's your turn to go through the suggested changes, right? Sometimes there'll be comments. The copy editor says, well, this is not clear. So what he or she wants you to do is to clarify that. Because as a reader, something that you wrote there was not clear, was not making sense, to revise it, right? And then go through every change, use track changes, accept the ones that you agree with, right? And make the changes that could be in the comments or respond to them, right? And then take your time. This is the most crucial stage in terms of the outcome of this is what is going to be your article. Okay? So take your time, accept the changes, reject the changes, and then send a clean copy back to the copy editor, right? So the copy editor is going to read it and see if everything is clear. Then he or she is going to then prepare a clean copy and send it to the editor. Okay? Now, the editor would then send it to what we call the layout editor. The layout editor's job is to prepare the galleys. They are the ones who prepare the final PDF file consistent with the style and size of the journal. Okay? And then after that has been done, the editor will then send back the final galleys to you for proofreading. Now, the reason it's proofreading only, in which they highly suggest to you, is please do not request for extensive changes because you've already done that in copy editing. Okay? Because no editor would like to break a galley and then remake it. And it takes a lot of time, and you don't edit the final proofs. You don't try to go into Adobe Editor and say, no. The best and the most formal way of asking for proofreading change. What are proofreading changes? Oh, please remove this dot here. This should be on, not add. One word. Gaps, right? Formatting changes, little changes. There is no room in proofreading to say, please revise the first paragraph. One of the special issue editor with Pakistaniyat a few years ago totally broke my heart, because every time I will prepare the galleys and send it to them, they were like, the author would like to make these changes. I was like, don't you even understand what a galley is? Like, it totally like told me not to publish anymore my journal. I mean, okay, so how do you suggest changes to a galley? You basically write a page where you say, here are my suggested proofreading changes. Page 1, line 12, please change X to Y. Page 5, line 13, please change Y to X. So you give these precise requests in your proofreading, right? And then send it back with the final file. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Then, okay, so your article is now with the editor, and they will let you know what the publishing schedule is. And a month, 2 months, sometimes 8 months, depending on the journal, there it is. Your article has now been published. Okay, and that's roughly like the journey. So what did we start with? We start with, figure out what your reasons for publication are, because those would decide for you what you want to write about, right? Then after you've done that, how do you figure out what you want to write about? Your topic is, you do broad research. What has been published about this novel, about this short story? That broad research would tell you, okay, this is a missing area, or here is where I can enter the conversation. How do you do the broad researches? You use the MLA database or any other database to do a keyword search about the novel or about the author. Figure out how many articles have been published about it. Read the abstracts. Choose 5, 6, 7 articles that are extremely important to your topic. Now that will then give you your topic. Then you go into creating a precise thesis. A thesis must introduce, the text that you're going to write about. What are you going to say about it, and why does it matter? Okay, these 3 things. Then you explain your theory. This is the theoretical tool that I'll be using, and here is my reason for it. If I use this, I can read this novel differently in this way, and if I do it in this way, this is what it's going to enable in the reader or in the student. And then you write your first draft. Okay, the first draft, depending on how you write, do you write diligently, page by page, paragraph by paragraph, correct it? It's an acceptable model. Or do you just write the first draft in one go? That is what I propose you should do in 1 or 2 sittings. And then you do the editing, fix everything, find a journal, look at the journal author guidelines, revise your article according to those author guidelines. Now, if the journal requires that you query the editor before you send in an article, you just write a polite email to them. Put in the subject, query about submission, and then say, dear Mr. or Miss or Madam so-and-so, I am so-and-so from this school. I'm thinking of sending you this article. My abstract is attached. Would you be willing to receive it? And if they say yes, fine, go ahead and send it. Most journals these days don't even require a query email, because their submission link is right on the first page. All you have to do is click on it and submit. Most journals would ask you for a Word file and not a PDF file. And then after the reviews, you revise, submit, and then wait for the finished product. So I think that kind of concludes my topic, but do remember on the page, webinar page, there is a link to my whole write-up about the publication process itself. We also have this on Amazon. You don't have to buy it. It's available for free on the website, but a Kindle version of it. It is also available. And if you have any questions, you can always reach me through the website, and I would be happy to answer those questions. Now I'm just going to look at if there are any questions here. And if not, then I am going to conclude our today's conversation. By the way, our next webinar, after I come back from Pakistan towards the end of August, is going to be on popular demand on Gayatri Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? So I will post the full text of the article and other associated things in a blog entry. And then I hope you all join. It's going to be a slightly more tedious discussion, and it might go longer, but that is going to be the topic of our next webinar. And meanwhile, you please do let me know how these are coming across to you, and if you would like me to improve anything. But for me, I'm not just doing it for you. This is a very invigorating activity, and I'm thankful to you that you all join me. So I'm just going to take a look at the questions and see if someone has posed a question that I need to answer. And if there are no questions, then I would conclude. What should an author do if one... Okay, so I think I've already answered that question. So about 35 of you from, 10 different countries joined me today. And I'm really grateful for that. A recorded version of this particular lecture would be available on the webinar archive page. And also, join our newsletter and, do visit the website, because that's how the websites are ranked, how many people come and use them. And send me your queries or questions through the website, and any suggestions about future webinars, and I will be very happy to accommodate you. And so without further ado, thank you so much for joining me, and stay blessed, and see you next time. Bye.